Troels, how are you? How do I pronounce your name?
Just as you said it right there.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't try it in Danish. It's too. You'll have to make guttural noises that'll ruin you.
So this conversation we're having is a meeting of people interested in the music NFT metadata standard, whatever that would be, coming from a Telegram group. This is supposed to be a larger meeting, and as it turns out, only you and I have shown up. So it's a very small party indeed. But it seems to me that that we can actually have a productive conversation by recording this and kind of doing it in a focused way that'll be useful to other people. And are you good at that?
Yeah, I have about 20 minutes. Good. So if you can go through stuff on that, that'll be good.
Let's do this. So the reason why it can be useful to the community as a whole to have such a small conversation is that in many ways, what the community needs to accomplish is research into use cases and real world applications that would have an interest in music NFT metadata. And the one that you're working on, derive.works, is very much related. Yes. So could you talk about that more?
Yeah, so I think we're coming from a lot of different angles. We're sort of exploring a lot of different angles that has to do with releasing music in Web3. We work with sort of the distributive aspects, the funding aspects, and also the curational aspects. But underneath all that, we have we issue music as collectibles, tokens, NFTs, whatever you want to call them, and basically someone is on the receiving end of that and needs to be able to use those tokens in various ways that I don't think the ecosystem or the community has figured out what are yet. So I think it's very interesting to be discussing these NFT metadata issues because it has a profound impact what kind of sort of schema we end up using or land on using, either through a sort of governed consensus approach or a bottom-up grassroots approach where things just end up in specific ways. And I think that right now we're seeing sort of other applications emerge that built on these, I don't know what to call them. I've called it open music because it seems to me that we're sort of releasing music instead of releasing it on a platform layer. We're sort of releasing it directly into the ether, as it was, into the protocol, and making it available for everyone to use. And I think that the primary job of the metadata is to two things. One, to of course provide the rich media experience.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, application level stuff, artist name, title, and so on.
Yeah, and MP3s, waves, whatever needs to be delivered, content. And then on the other side, we have a license issue, because when I release music as an artist on a protocol layer, I would like to, at the same time, be able to describe how this open format is allowed to be used in applications and
a rights layer
around the internet, or
So you need three things. You need a rights layer, you need a way to get a playlist into an NFT, and you need music-related metadata that can be consumed by a media player.
Yes. Yeah. I also need, I don't know if you mentioned that, but I also need a way to allow, if I release an album, and I want non-commercial players to be able to use it, but commercial players to not, or at least have sort of agreements, or like in the example of, I was talking to someone today, in the example of podcasts. So you could easily imagine that in 5 years, when everyone has released their music as NFTs, you have all this music floating around. Someone comes in, scoops up all this basically free material and piggybacks on it to generate a platform for, I don't know, a subscription model for podcasts or something like that. That's basically what happened with podcasts. All these podcasts are out there, they're free, they're on open protocols, RSS. And then we have all these big commercial players just basically aggregating all that stuff and then building their own businesses on top of it. I would like to be able to, at this point in time, state clearly in the things that I'm releasing, the music I'm releasing, what it's allowed to be used for. And I can both, with NFTs, of course, I can sort of prove that the license comes from me, because you have provenance down the chain. You can see where the NFT originates from, right?
So do you have an idea of enforcement as part of that?
No.
So it's consensual.
Other than sort of legal enforcement as it works otherwise, and, you know, basic ethics and I mean, it would be very sort of akin to something like font licenses, because it's extremely hard to enforce things, but I would be able to prove very easily that people are using this stuff illegally, because I can see where they're pulling it from, right?
I think we found in Web 2.0 music and peer-to-peer music that consumers want applications that are professional. Professional applications require some funding. Investors require safe legalities. And there's sort of a positive reinforcement going on to create an ecosystem around fully legal, licensed, and legally safe music ecosystems. So to give a counterexample, the head of Bertelsmann was named in a lawsuit against I think it was Napster. I think BMG invested in Napster, and when the label sued Napster, they took that all the way back to the corporate officers. And on a business level, that just doesn't make sense. I mean, here's a guy who's rich, he's got a family, he's in a country club. The last thing he wants is to be served papers at the country club. I think that the biggest hurdle is probably just the amount of infrastructure that would have to be built to implement a rights framework.
Yeah, I agree. How do you mean in terms of enforcing something like?
More in terms of implementing the distribution pipeline for collecting fees and then distributing them back to rights holders. It's certainly doable. The webcasting industry, to give one example, has this large, really complex distribution chain that covers things like neighboring rights for countries where there's no performance royalty for streaming or for radio. But I think it's a fascinating project that's worth doing. I actually love the idea. I think it's cool. You know, it's a big new frontier, and I feel like a lot of people are kind of dissatisfied with the walled gardens and the silos.
Yeah.
Like I want an open web where all it takes to participate as a provider is an account of some kind. You put something up in the web, and you make it interoperable through protocols. What we have right now in this generation, kind of 2005 to the present moment, are things that are really typified by YouTube and Spotify, where there are important commercial providers that are going to host and own the relationship with a customer and where vendors are mediating the entire interaction. And they're necessary in order to provide a framework for rights holders and creators to engage, happily, for some definition of happy. But I don't think it's acceptable to live in a world where that's necessary and where an open web defined only by interoperability is impossible.
No. I think that the thing I find fascinating about releasing music as NFTs is that it essentially establishes an origin point of some sort for any given work, right? And you can imagine that releasing your music as an NFT would also be at the same time sort of cementing that you or registering that you made this work at this given point in time. So that's the ledger side of things. It makes sort of perfect sense, and it's been tried numerous times to develop these all-encompassing systems of metadata and work registration and stuff like that on the blockchain, but failed, maybe because the scope was too large in a sense. And now we have this sort of opportunity to have people who are already doing this, because they for any reason, probably monetary, have decided to go into this, and they see that here's a way to sort of capture the value of what they're releasing. But at the same time, if we could somehow use this moment to educate artists and self-publishers about, metadata hygiene, or metadata, the importance of having control of the metadata around your whatever it is, your audio work, is sort of a golden opportunity, I think. And I think my idea for the usage license was basically just to have like this really simple way to signal what the terms are for this particular piece of work that's been put out on the protocol layer. So not have it, once again balloon into this giant sort of scope of things it could do, and it could feed into PROs, and it could feed into broadcasting, it feed into everything. I think it's like the first step is that we're going to see these players like Future Tape, or I saw one today that sounded like Winamp, it was called something else, that sort of source their material from these NFTs, from platforms, but basically they're sourcing it from the protocols underneath. And it would be amazing to start by securing that relation between the publishers or the people releasing stuff and those who are in the sort of immediate, I think of it as sort of maybe something like MySpace musicians and blogs were in the early days. They had a sort of interconnectedness. They needed each other to survive. And in the same way, I think we're going to see the question I get the most about music NFTs is, where do I listen to these? And once we have these, like Future Tape or something similar that sources these and makes it accessible, we basically have a decoupled Bandcamp model that we could sort of.
So here's Future Tape.
Yeah.
Which has an interface that is a derivative of the old Mux tape, which is something about 15 years ago. That was an unlicensed, browser-oriented playlist that was driven out of business through lawsuits.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the streaming economy around Apple Music, for example, it was able to get licenses and to get rights holders to participate through the the threat of the alternative, which is completely unlicensed music usage, things like Muxtape. There's obviously a lot of dissatisfaction about that from the musician perspective, although not from the label perspective. Labels are doing very well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the music NFT, I think that NFTs have created a lot of hope that there's another angle on this. There's another way to deliver value, to make listeners happy, and then to derive value. And there obviously is a pipeline for money to flow in one direction and rights to flow in the other, or some kind of asset to flow in the other. There's not a lot that we know about this new ecosystem. It's so experimental and so new. The value prop that's been established so far is collectibles, I believe there is a part of the NFT market that is genuinely interested in collectibles, but I think it's pretty small, probably like 5%, maybe 15%, but I think it's real. I do think it exists. And I think that it's possible to build value outwards from there. So for example, I think if you could buy a signed MP3 that was autographed, that showed the autograph every time you played it, that would have value to a lot of listeners. And we could do that right now. We could, have the embedded album art for the track be, custom generated. Mm-hmm. I think that the larger ecosystem of listening would be held back by the lack of catalog, right? Fans are really driven by their ability to access things they want to hear. And they go to Spotify or, Pandora or YouTube looking for a particular song. And this new ecosystem would be unable to deliver that. So let's go there. What are your thoughts on how limited catalog could be, not a problem?
I haven't fully formed any opinions on how that might work, but I think that the ability to sort of, that's the promise, but the ability to capture the value initially by selling your NFT or whatever it is, it does establish this new sort of system where that when I see future tape develop around this or similar players, it reminds me of Bandcamp. It reminds me of having a platform where people can buy stuff, but you can also go in and stream stuff. And Bandcamp is a place where I think I've experienced a lot of times that people put up the almost entire releases for free streaming. Yep. You also buy them. And people decide to, so they get that by buying it, you support it. So, so there's
that kind of goes to the autographed NFT concept, or the idea of a relationship between the artist and the fan.
Yes, that's sort of what I've called the ring around model. That you have an initial audience that you can serve with these sort of items, these objects that you can sort of that create connections between you and the audience, and then you have like a broader audience who are interested in getting to know the music and maybe just wanted to listen to it casually, which is basically the new kind of radio or broadcasting, which is like the outer ring of audience, right? So I think that there are still some things that need to be worked out in terms of getting over this idea of, for example, remuneration per stream, which is not necessarily a model that can exist in this kind of environment.
I think that Bandcamp works around the limitations on catalog by emphasizing what they have and by drawing fans into being interested in what's available. And I remember Pandora only had something like 800,000 tracks in their catalog for a long time until they went to the full catalog on demand model 5 years ago or so.
Hey, Lucas. Hey, Troels.
Thank you for joining us.
Sorry, I'm super late. I lost track of time. But yeah, I'm Aidan. My background's also in like tech, computer science. So familiar with data design and stuff. And at the moment, I'm working on a few music-related things. I'm working on Noise, which is a music NFT marketplace that launched last year. And then I'm also working on it's NOIZD.
Is that right?
ZD, like D for dog at the end instead of T, and only a single I.
.com?
Yeah.
So let me fill you in, Aidan, because almost nobody showed up, we turned this into almost like a podcast and are recording it, and they're just going to release that for the group.
Okay, sure.
And we've been doing this for about a half hour. Troels probably has to go, and I'm happy to just keep going.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I've been also working on shared standards because I'm working on another project, Spinamp, which is a Web3 music player, and for that we're like building.
That's what I was talking about, Lucas. Sounded like Winamp. I couldn't remember the name.
Yeah.
Yeah. It came up.
But we're busy building like a pipeline that aggregates data across multiple platforms into a shared kind of standard and shared database. And like I think along with standards, especially with Web3 projects, we don't just have the ability to have shared standards, we also kind of have the ability to have a shared database. And that's like a level up from shared standards. And that's something I've been thinking about and starting to build as well.
Yeah. So your interest in music metadata is the ability for this to exist at all.
Yeah, pretty much.
Tell us about the database.
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, it's just a prototype, and there's like two pieces. One is this, which is a pipeline which is based on this technology called the graph. The graph is like a Web3 platform that allows you to go and pull data out of Ethereum and other EVM-based platforms and write your own custom script to kind of modify it, add things in, and put it into its own schema. And so they've got like this language for specifying how it works. But I think the more important part is what is the actual schema we want to end up with in the end, and what does the data look like? And this initial draft has like a basic schema for like an NFT, a track, an artist profile, based on like, for example, if the artist has multiple profiles across different platforms, and then a few kind of opinions about how we should be using identifiers for tracks and artists. And I think that's the kind of the part that's been more important for me, because other parts of the metadata are easy to kind of change later on. Like if it's the name of a song, usually that metadata will live within a specific record. And so it can be changed later if the field or the standards change, but the identifiers are all like associated with each other and linked to each other. And if we're building up like a web of associations of how these different artists and tracks and platforms are related to each other, making sure that like the design of the identifiers is done with a like more forward-thinking strategy, it has been more important. And so that's the one thing that I've been thinking about. And at the moment,
so you're interested in building a consumer of media, but not a marketplace for media.
I think at the moment, yeah, that's the primary goal. I mean, I'm hoping that there's like a slice of the data that like fulfills both purposes, and that like the standards and the data that I'm building for this is aligned with a wider standard that is not just for consumers and is maybe just like a slice out of that standard rather than being something that's different to the standard.
Yeah. And are you thinking about rights and revenues and I don't know, kind of, ongoing revenue stream?
I mean, I saw Troels' article yesterday or the day before, and definitely like resonate with that, and think it's important to handle rights. I think like especially scaling to more artists, like I think with the like Noise, which is the platform that I work on, and at least Catalog and Sound, like the artists are putting their music on chain. Culturally, it seems like most artists are within the kind of cultural compatibility of just putting things on in public and seeing where things go. But obviously, like longer term, as we scale out to kind of more platforms or different artists with, for example, that may already have record label deals and things, and don't have full control of their music, have stronger opinions, then being able to maintain this kind of open kind of Web3 culture, but still fulfill what the artist wants is going to be important. And so, yeah, something like an open music standard around rights definitely looks like a good stepping stone towards that.
So are you thinking about revenues and spin out?
Not yet, no. I mean, I kind of just started off as a side project for fun, and because I felt like there was a need there. I mean, I'm funding it myself at the moment and not really trying to fundraise, but in a month or two, depending on how things go, maybe we'll start to think about that.
How about in Noise?
Noise is, we've been working on that for like a year. And currently we are minting with different artists for free. We're not kind of taking commission, but I imagine at some point there'll be some kind of fee on the marketplace. But it depends. I mean, both are experimental projects. I think the whole space is experimental. And so to even be certain on what your revenue model is going to be is something you shouldn't have too much certainty on. Noise, we also haven't fundraised. I think we tried to fundraise for a while, but we've seen less traction than the other marketplaces. And we also have a focus on it, like a lot of African music, because the co-founder there has a background with that. So that's a bit different. But yeah, that's kind of a summary of that.
I mean, it's interesting that African music is a focus there because African music is also relatively underserved in the streaming market. Yeah,
exactly. And I think like that's something we're hoping to help with Noise at least.
I think that one of the big possibilities and promises of NFTs as a new platform for the digital music industry is the possibility of interoperability through protocols and an open internet rather than through deals with one provider and one distributor, one platform like a silo, and for the fan, the opportunity is to have kind of a larger variety, like a global scale platform. And I don't know if that's even really true, because honestly, YouTube can fit a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of variety, but the promise of this new platform anyway is a truly global scale entity. So do you see what, I don't know, do you think that that's true at all? Do you think that this is really possibly larger than YouTube, for example? I mean, specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I think the potential is there, but with most new tech and complex, like there's always like some blurred map outside the scope of where you're looking, and maybe you kind of explored more and you realize there's some edge case where actually this thing is not sustainable and doesn't work. I don't think we've like fully explored the map to see if there's some crutch that's gonna prevent scaling or sustainability, but it definitely seems like at least there's enough potential and possibility there for that kind of disruption to occur, and that it's worth continuing to explore.
Okay. And where are you getting your metadata schema from? Did you make it yourself?
Yeah, I just made it myself for now. I mean, focused on primarily like the fan listening thing, the data is pretty minimal, and so it's not there's not anything too challenging to do there.
Pardon me.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's the other idea with that, like open source repo, is like to try and facilitate that like openness in being somewhat platform agnostic and open data, and the kind of hyperstructure idea that's been talked about with Zora.
Yeah. So talk about that a little bit more, about the Zora conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really specific to Zora. I think Jacob from Zora made some blog posts about the idea, but really it applies to kind of all of Ethereum and Web3 in general, whether it's related to finance or related to media, in that when we have like these kind of tech systems that give us open access to the like computational logic, like in the case of Zora, where they're like smart contracts and the auction contracts are there available for anyone to tap into, or the actual data in these databases, like in the case with all NFTs, where a lot of the kind of data for the NFTs is either stored on chain on Ethereum or on IPFS, where it's fairly sustainable and has some like longevity, then it makes it easy. Essentially, when the data is open like this, you get a kind of composability that emerges as more and more people start to play with things and build things on top of things. Like, well, we've seen that in DeFi, where like the composability in DeFi led to an explosion of like creative ideas and kind of projects. And obviously there's like a dark side to that, with like people trying more like trying to build things that capture value without providing value. But that baseline is like an interesting kind of setup, similar to kind of how the internet emerged initially, I suppose, before there were these like walled gardens.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the conversations in the NFT music metadata group about specific proposals? I think that the one that is most fleshed out is this concept.
Yeah. I think someone made a copy of the doc where there was comments. I think I made a few specific comments on one of those docs.
Let me apologize for all those dings. I'd have to figure out how to suppress this, and it's for the purposes of this call. It's not worth it. Sorry, go ahead, please.
But yeah, I think it looks like a good start. I think the idea that like, are we building standards? Are we building like a better hyperstructure / better actual database with data in it, as opposed to just the schema, is a separate question. And like, if the goal is for both, and we want to put attention on the latter, then thinking about the actual data that gets filled into these standards and where that data lives and how it's generated and so on is a missing piece, I think, to the conversation. But I think like also with standards, I think I definitely have a more like scrappy, agile attitude towards things of like, okay, let's just start building and using things before needing to get super formalized on the standard, especially with like nation tech like we have today, before there's too much essentially like technical debt or data debt that exists, especially like with the kind of aggregated subgraph thing that you saw that I was working on. It's quite easy to clean up data and transform it at this stage before there's like crazy scale. And so like the balancing act of like putting too much attention into standards and slow processes versus just winging it and building stuff and experimenting is a spectrum. And I think like we're probably slowly crossing that spectrum towards more standardization and more robust things. And so even like now when I'm trying to build Spinamp and the ingester, I'm trying to put a bit more heavy thought into the standards, but not like too much, and not too much kind of coordination and process and delays to get stuff built.
I think that standards are arguably a kind of Web 2-ish thing. And I've gotten a feeling of sort of pushback against that way of doing things. And maybe standards are sort of like a Web 1 way of thinking about things. And Web 2 was sort of the rise of the silos, kind of Pax Romana, where interoperability came from accepting dominant players that were able to define not so much standards, but conventions around their own personal business needs. The Apple Music style guide is kind of the classic example. So this is the style guide for metadata for content that's being submitted to the iTunes Music Store and
Okay.
Apple Music, and it's pretty thorough, and they, you know, were the first mover, and I think that they have kind of defined the professional layer of metadata. Like if you're a label that makes any money, you know how to emit this stuff. Although you may not do it consciously, you may go through a digital distributor that actually deals with the format. But to give an example, a track title has a very defined format in this world, like the youth, right? And in practice, if you go and look at your, however you listen to music, you'll see this is how things are done. So this is an example of something that's neither a public database like Music Brains, nor a standard, but instead is simply one dominant vendor that has an enormous influence commercially, dictating how things are going to work. And that has the advantage of being sort of agile, right? Like,
yeah, and I think it makes sense, and like it could be a guideline like for us as well. I mean, obviously there's the risk that like some artist or some platform is trying to do something that doesn't fit neatly into the standard, or that is even like kind of inhibited by the standard. And so leaving space for that kind of stuff without allowing, like without the standards, and it's really like the culture around the standard that needs to kind of know that it is putting in place some like kind of more harder rules and systems, and like as part of its culture of implementing that and like sharing that and getting people to use that. Also having like a counterforce of knowing, okay, if something else comes up, then like keeping some space to have attention for it and adapt for it as needed. And it's just as much like a cultural thing around the people that are thinking about and building the standard and using it, as about like how opinionated the standard is.
Like the world of podcasts was formed around the technical requirements of RSS, and a lot of those features kind of were built around this XML format that in a lot of ways is, you know, either entirely gone or only far behind the scenes, but that still kind of defines a cultural influence.
Yeah.
So for example, podcasts follow the blog convention of most recent at the top. You know, you start with the most recent and work back by default anyway,
Right.
even for some content that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and specifically for music and Web3, like the cultural landscape of what musicians are doing in Web3 is like a bit different. Like we're seeing a lot more collaboration, a lot more like people jamming together and doing casual things, a lot more like sharing of stems, and or if you've seen a project like async art, and whether these kinds of collaborations fit as neatly into something like the Apple standard or not, I don't know. I haven't looked through it, but I'm assuming probably not. And so there's also maybe something to be said for like where the standard could be inhibiting to that. Like even with like Spinamp, like currently using something similar to this, but like imagine we want to do things where like artists are doing way more like jams and remixes and sharing stems and combining stems in different ways That's not going to fit as easily into even SpinAmp, whether it's the standard and the data and the UX. And so there's already a form of like constraint that comes in by not just the standard, but by even releasing a particular app with a particular user experience and UI. And so it's not something I guess you can get right comprehensively from the start, but it's in a way, it's more about having kind of the culture and time and attention to be able to evolve to facilitate what happens.
I think that the existence of application providers that are doing interesting things that are compelling to consumers, is enough to drive some of this forward. So new features, new ways of looking at things, and new subcultures. So for example, these folks, like this music is distinctive. And this is a community, this is a culture, whereas this Derive project that Troels was talking about before is a new application. So to some extent, the product creativity of innovators is enough to drive value creation. Although it's going to be a limited value prop, right? Like people are going to go to this for a portion of their listening, but it can't define all of it. And maybe that's fine. Like, would you be satisfied with making something that was a niche, or do you need to conquer the world?
No, I think like the kind of niche products are definitely a cool thing and super valuable and satisfying. So yeah, I mean, I think it's also it's nice to like also be working on something that you think has got the potential to change an industry or become like part of a revolution or evolution. But it's also good to work on these things. And so like, where I don't know what would personally like satisfy me or not, but definitely both are parts of that fulfillment.
What's stopping you from adopting Catalog's proposal? The one in Notion, wherever that went. This one.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be selling it. It's
no, nothing really. I think like just haven't put. I think like just spending some time to look at it and integrate it. I don't think there's anything about the proposal specifically that is inhibiting or missing or incompatible. It's just about putting time and attention into giving a shit, and as opposed to just like building what I need to get working for what's in front of me for the next week, as opposed to what makes sense for the next few months.
Are there any features you need from metadata or data, like leaving aside how the data is expressed? Are there any features you can't build without improvements to the underlying schema?
I think there's definitely features that like take more time to build without improvements, but I don't think there's any like fundamental blocker, because it's like with what we're building, one of the goals is to be able to handle messy data and different platforms with different standards. And so I'm trying to build something that's set up to handle that mess and fill in the gaps when needed. But that does mean it takes more work because you have to do like cleanup and gap filling. Whereas if stuff was already in a standard, then a lot of that work is already done for you because it didn't exist in the first place. But given that like I've already been thinking about doing that work, it's not as much of a concern.
Cool. We probably should wrap up here. Anything we should cover in addition you wanted to go through?
I guess I'm also curious about like the use cases that will emerge from a shared standard and a shared database. I think because a lot of the like standards and database should kind of be driven by the end use cases. And obviously we don't know what they are, because some of it's there, like you need the data first before people start to experiment and play. Sometimes there is some like vision or foresight on like, oh, I wish this could exist, but the standards and data is not there for it yet. And so we do have like the imagination to guide us as well. But we talked a lot about like standards and maybe less about the vision and imagination of what will come about, and maybe more thoughts and imagination on that side would be useful as well.
I agree. I mean, I think too much imagination is something that's kind of holding us back right now. Like a need to focus and deliver particular things, and at the same time, the need to arrive.
It does seem like a focus on specifically like the finance, the rights, is a starting point, because there's clearly a need there for like things like splits and rights. And there are some protocols like Mirror already has like a splits feature, and I think it's not really music specific. And maybe it doesn't need to be music specific, but especially with the culture of Web3 music, where there's a lot more collaboration and jamming and like people playing with things together, that seems like maybe a more prescient focus potential.
Yes. I think that that's hard to do technically, and at the same time has huge promise as a business and as infrastructure to enable all this to happen. And I think it's kind of interesting.
When you say hard to do technically, what do you mean?
I mean that rights is contentious, legally loaded. There's a lot of money at stake. The data flows are difficult to administer. So, for example, you have to get it right. If you mail a check to an address, it has to be the right address. There are a lot of people involved, languages. There's monopoly.
And I think on some of those points, like we have a lot of an easier time with Web3, like, writing up a smart contract to split a thing in a certain way and give the users an ability to have like an interface where they can go and just configure a bunch of splits and conditions and then deploy it on chain in a smart contract is not too challenging. But getting people to kind of coordinate and know what they want is often the harder part. And then there's like maybe long tail issues around how do you ensure people manage their, Ethereum addresses or their smart contracts or their multi-sigs, and what happens if someone loses access or something breaks on the human layer, and having fallbacks for that kind of stuff. But those are also problems that like the whole of Web3 is thinking about solving, and it's not really specific to music. And so we have a lot of support to rely on for that side of things.
I agree. I think a lot of people are working on it and are, like I think it's pretty hard to do right, like I said, but it's worth doing. And I think that the complexity of it is sort of satisfying. Like if that appeals to you personally, but it does for me. I like that kind of project that requires you to find something simple and clean out of a big murky mess. I see that in chat, Troels posted have to go. Nice meeting you both. Look forward to meeting next time. Aidan, thanks for stopping in. I think that this conversation was, I think it was successful. It was interesting. I think it's a contribution to the overall dialogue we've been having around metadata standards. I think the fact that there wasn't a quorum for a proper meeting, I think it suggests that there isn't really a consensus around a standard and what is being accomplished there. And probably people will want to chat about that more.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, otherwise, thanks for the call. Thanks for the questions. Definitely like helpful to have someone question you in terms of refining your ideas and mental model of things. It's always good.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to contribute in that way, and just good to meet you.
Likewise.
All right.
Hopefully we have a nice follow-up around this at some point with more coordination.
Indeed. Okay.
Cool. Cheers.